James and his mother survived the cult, from which hundreds of people have died. They were followers of Kenyan evangelical pastor Paul Mackenzie. They asked us to hide their identities. Most other survivors are being held by the police. This is where Mackenzie called people to live with him in a remote, arid forest near Kenya's coast. He told them to first starve their children to death and then starve themselves to reach heaven. James says his brother rescued him. He's visibly emaciated. His mother denies she was starving him. James says years before he was inspired by Mackenzie's preaching in church.
Education.
His messages were okay early on, but they changed. From 2017 on, he told us to stop going to school and to pray instead of going to hospital. He was a senior person, so we believed him and obeyed him.
This was Paul Mackenzie's church in Malindi. He used to stand right here every Sunday and preach to crowds of hundreds of people who gathered here. Thousands more watched on his television station and on YouTube. His increasingly radical preaching drew criticism from some, but in a context where the government's widely seen to work only for the benefit of a wealthy few, and it's criticised for weak provision of public healthcare and education, his messages of rejecting the state and modernity resonated with many others. Hundreds of them from Kenya and beyond followed him to the forest over the last 4 years. The search for bodies and survivors has been going on for more than a month. Investigators have said there may have been organ harvesting or bodies brought here from other places. The police operation has since become heavily restricted.
The forensic team was able to exhume 15 bodies today.
Nobody's authorised to talk, except the regional chief, who announces the numbers after each day of digging. Rights groups, who were among the first to raise the alarm, say they've been excluded from the post-mortems.
If you don't allow human rights and media, you allow speculations. Everybody's speculating whether the government has a hand in it or whether the people who did this may be protected by the government.
Mackenzie's been in jail for 5 weeks, awaiting prosecution. He was arrested several times before, but released. The government set up a commission of inquiry to look into what happened. Meanwhile, people are still being found alive. Some of them have refused food and medical treatment, saying they want to continue on their journey to heaven. James says Mackenzie shouldn't go to jail.
I'm happy to be alive, but I don't condemn Mackenzie. He was a preacher with his own beliefs. I can't say anything good or bad about him, but I would advise people to go back to the Bible and interrogate his preachings.
The town's morgue has now been filled twice over. A second round of post-mortems is due to start on Tuesday. Hundreds of people are still missing. Malcolm Webb, Al Jazeera, Malindi, Kenya.
They worked through the night, battling a wildfire that had spread over 8,000 hectares. Spain's military emergencies unit has been spraying water on the flames and trying to create firewalls. Strong winds here in Extremadura, near the border with Portugal, have made their task harder. Hundreds of people from 3 villages have been displaced. But local authorities say they're hopeful better weather conditions could help control the wildfire soon.
I feel anger and sadness because many people have lost animals, land, a bit of everything to the fire. It makes me sad because after so many years working, they lose everything because a person started the fire on purpose. To me, that's not fair. Once the wildfire started, all the teams should have been deployed immediately, not wait until the next day.
The fire, which started on Wednesday, is being blamed on arsonists. Spain's environment minister has echoed scientists in saying the country's experiencing more frequent and intense events as a result of the climate emergency. After 3 years of below-average rainfall, Spain's already seen multiple wildfires this year. The drought was made worse by temperatures in April that are normally seen at the height of summer. Last year, according to the European Forest Fire Information System, nearly 500 separate fires destroyed a record 307,000 hectares in Spain. Nadeem Barber, Al Jazeera.
Italy's farm lobby says heavy rain and flooding has caused incalculable damage to land in the north. At least 13 people have been killed, while 10,000 more have been displaced by the storm. We have Huda Abdelhamid, who's joining us now from near Imola in northeastern Italy. So, Huda, it's being described as Italy's worst flooding in 100 years. How extensive is the damage?
Well, actually, we've been traveling around the villages here in the area in Reggio Emilia, Emilia-Romagna, rather. And I have to say that, you know, what we see over and over again is more or less like this: streets completely flooded. There are people who are still in their houses, and we did see the civil protection going to them, trying to get them either out or bring them food and water. Now, we went to other villages where there is no, for example, network coverage whatsoever. There is no electricity. We saw people queuing by water tankers because also the water treatment plant in the area has been completely flooded. And then we went to a village called Sant'Agata, and there people described that they had water up to 1.6 meters in their house. We saw them really shoveling all their belongings into the mud. Quite a disastrous scene to witness in this part of the country, and people are actually quite angry because they say that rescue is coming quite late, and also they blame the poor infrastructure that is around this area.
Okay, we'll let you go for now. Thank you, Huda, for that update from Italy.
It's a sea of mud. With the floodwater beginning to recede, the devastation it left in its wake is starting to emerge. Faenza, a city known as the ceramics capital of Italy, is now covered in a thick layer of sludge. Wherever you look, people are shoveling and scrubbing, trying to recover its colors and art. But much has been lost forever. At the 18th century Manfrediana library, at least 10,000 books have been destroyed. There is no way to salvage anything in these piles. Thankfully, most of them are fairly new, the ancient manuscripts and rare books being on the upper floor. Still, Daniela Simonini is perplexed.
The water was violent. It arrived with a huge force, and in just a few minutes it engulfed everything. Shops, it destroyed lives. It's really scary because one doesn't expect this from water. Water is a friendly element, but it can also be deadly when it arrives so violently.
Faenza is known for its glazed earthenware, known as faience, coveted by Europe's kings and queens for centuries. A tradition that continues to thrive today, says Monica Zauli. She manages a museum collecting her father's, Carlo, sculptures and other works. It lies in tatters. The water seeped in absolutely everywhere in the city, not discriminating between past and present, public or private. This actually used to be an exhibition room just a few days ago. Now all you have is a puddle of mud mixed with the clay that the artists used to use. The clay comes from the hills surrounding the city. That's what made Carlo Zauli famous worldwide.
This water didn't just erase my past and the memory of my family. We had left the studio as it was. Many artists came to work here from all over the world. Many of the artworks were destroyed, and we won't be able to find the fragments because the mud is so dense it's impossible to sieve through it.
A sentiment shared by Carmen Sassi. She curates the work of her late husband Ivo, kept in a desecrated church. 70 years of sketches, tuccos and gessos remain underwater. She has no idea if any will be salvageable. It's the story of everyone in Faenza. Piles of past and present are everywhere waiting to be removed. Ironically, a city that thrived because of its earth and clay was also brought down by its own riches. Just how bad is the damage is yet unknown. Huda Abdelhamid, Al Jazeera, Faenza in Emilia-Romagna.
Thousands of pigs on a Dutch farm, meat intended for the Spanish market. But after nearly 20 years, Annette Mertens and her husband have decided to stop. Soon they will sell all their livestock.
Our nitrogen emissions are extremely high and our business needs a lot of renovation. We need new stables because these are outdated. But if the bank sees that our emissions are so high, they don't want to support us any longer. So we had no choice but to stop.
The farm lies next to a nature reserve that is protected under European law. Now that the EU has approved the government's buyout plan, the family hopes to receive generous compensation. In recent years, thousands of farmers have protested against proposals to drastically cut emissions. More than 50,000 Dutch farmers keep more than 11 million pigs and nearly 4 million cows.
Intense and highly productive farming has turned the Netherlands into one of the world's main food producers. But a farm like this could soon be a thing of the past. While farmers are now being pressured into selling their animals and find another profession, others insist they'll continue.
In a few years, dairy farmer Jan van der Wind wants to hand over his herd to his son. He says the government should invest more in technology that reduces emissions from animal waste.
Farmers have done a lot for this country, but the government doesn't seem to realise this. The minister talking about hugely attractive buyout packages, that's a ridiculous statement.
Greenpeace says compensating farmers on a voluntary basis won't lead to a big enough reduction in nitrogen.
The government should force farmers to stop. It has to happen now and it will be painful. Farmers have to be told, you will need to quit and we will withdraw your license. We will compensate you, but you have to stop.
Why should they? This is their life. It's like they are criminals. It's like they are doing something bad. They produce food. Except for water and oxygen, we need food.
But damage the nature at the same time.
No, that's bull crap, I would say.
Caroline van der Plas has grown into a political force to be reckoned with after her farmer citizens movement became the largest party in all Dutch provinces during elections in March. While she supports compensating farmers who want to quit, her party is firmly against stricter measures, possibly delaying government plans to halve nitrogen emissions by 2030. Step Vaassen, Al Jazeera in Woudenberg, the Netherlands.
Researchers in Zambia have built a Group of Seven summit has now wrapped up in Japan with leaders pledging more support for Ukraine's war with Russia. So the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, there they are, they laid wreaths at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial. And Zelensky compared Japan's rebuilding of the city that was devastated by a nuclear bomb to his hopes for war-torn Ukraine. Then there was the U.S. President Joe Biden, who reaffirmed his support for Kyiv, unveiling a $375 million military aid package to bolster Ukraine's defenses. On Saturday, Russia claimed victory in the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. President Zelensky said his troops are still fighting.
I cannot share with you the tactical views of our military, of our warriors, but as of today, we can see that the country, which is a dozen times bigger than we are, cannot occupy us, cannot win this war. And we understand that a bit more, and then we will be prevailing, and that is why we are acting how we are acting, valuing the lives of people. The hardest is if Bakhmut had some military tactical mistake, for instance, and people could be surrounded, then all the military know what could happen, how we could create the situation for people not to be captured. Now our people are accomplishing a very simple mission. They are now in Bakhmut. I will not share where exactly, but eyewitnesses say that Bakhmut is not occupied by the Russian Federation as of today.
Okay, we have Natasha Butler. There she is. In a moment, we'll bring in Natasha. She's standing by with a reaction from Kyiv. But first, let's bring in Rob McBride, who's joining us from the summit venue in Hiroshima. Well, the summit has now ended, Rob. We heard from several leaders today, including President Biden and President Zelensky. Just give us the highlights and tell us what they had to say.
Yeah, Volodymyr Zelensky leaves this G7 having been able to meet in person, often for the first time, and engage with many more world leaders from countries that have either remained neutral or have quite close links to Russia. There's a long list of countries that have come along to this G7, but quite significant influential countries such as Indonesia, Brazil, India, and of course he has been able to reconnect with the G7, his big supporters there. which in turn has come out and declaring its unwavering commitment to Ukraine. This was repeated by Fumio Kishida, the host Japanese Prime Minister, in his closing address, given fittingly in the Hiroshima Memorial Peace Park, which commemorates the atomic attack in 1945, calling out Russia for its aggression against Ukraine and also attacking Russia for its threats to use nuclear weapons, which people here in Japan almost universally regard with absolute abhorrence. Zelensky is very good at connecting with host nations and audiences wherever he is in the world, and as he did again here, saying that he was struck going around the museum to the Hiroshima atomic attack at how the scenes of carnage and devastation he has witnessed in Ukrainian towns and cities, a tortured wasteland, as he put it. But just as Hiroshima has rebuilt, he promised that Ukraine would rebuild, but with the grim caveat that will only come with peace. Peace will only come, he says, after Russia has been defeated on the battlefield.
Okay, Rob, stand by for just a moment, because I'd like to bring in Natasha Butler to just clarify the situation for us in Bakhmut, Natasha, because when Zelensky was speaking at the G7, he said that his troops are still fighting there. The Russians say they've claimed victory. What's going on?
Well, it's a confused picture. It often is the case with Bakhmut, the situation there that has been grinding on, that battle grinding on for so many months. What we have here is claim and counterclaim. On Saturday, the boss of the Wagner Russian mercenary group said that his forces were in full control of Bakhmut. Well, that was quickly refuted by authorities here in Kyiv. We then heard there the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky saying that Ukrainian troops are still fighting, are still in Bakhmut. Well, we have had some updates from Ukraine's military. The commander of Ukraine's ground forces, Alexander Syrsky, he says that the situation on the ground is difficult, but it is under control. He says Ukrainian forces do control a very small part of the city, but enough, he says, to allow those forces to enter the city if they would need to. Rather cryptically, he said that the situation could probably change. He also said that Ukrainian forces had made some gains on the flanks, on the suburbs of Bakhmut. So that's the picture from the commander of Ukraine's military forces on the ground. But as I said, of course, what we do know, the big picture, is this battle has been going on now between Russian and Ukrainian forces for 10 months, many lives lost on both sides. Okay, thank you, Natasha. We'll let you go for now. That's our Natasha Butler reporting for us from Kyiv. And we'll once again cross over to Hiroshima and Japan. Rob McBride is there because, Rob, the other big item on the agenda, of course, was China. So tell us what happened there.
Yeah, this G7 has seen the G7 come together in a united front against China. We heard in Joe Biden, the US president, his closing speech and press conference saying he doesn't want to decouple from China. That would simply be impossible to do. The West, the G7 and China need to engage on things like the global economy and on shared interests like tackling climate change. But what he stressed was he wanted the G7 to de-risk from China. By that he means the US and its allies, protecting things like strategically sensitive supply chains in things like advanced semiconductor production, which he says China has misused in the past in things like weapons production. Well, he says that the G7 will take a stand against that, and in their communique they outline a whole host of alleged malign behavior by China when it comes to the global economy and conducting what they call economic coercion, military expansionism, threats to Taiwan, also a lack of transparency in the development of its nuclear arsenal, saying that just as the G7 is united in support of Ukraine, so they have never been more united when it comes to taking a stand against China. China, for its part, very quickly has hit back, calling the G7 a small group, which itself is a threat to peace and stability. So a lot from this G7 to annoy and irk both China and Russia.
Thank you, Rob McBride, reporting for us from Hiroshima, Japan. So as
former enemies, now allies, paying their respects at the site of one of the single most horrific attacks carried out in war. At the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park, a show of unity from the G7 in response to new dangers in a world seemingly imperiled by new conflicts. Seated for their first session, a working lunch, the 7 plus EU leaders heard from the host about the mounting global challenges they face.
The world is currently confronting complex crises, such as the pandemic, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Facing these, the G7, which shares fundamental values, must effectively respond to the key issues of the international community and lead the world.
On this first day of the summit, the biggest news was made by a world leader who wasn't here, President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, but who was widely reported to be planning to attend in person on the last day instead of by video link. Speculation that was later denied by Kyiv. The G7 has issued a lengthy statement reaffirming its support for Ukraine and condemning the Russian invasion. It adds that a just peace can never be realized without Russia completely withdrawing its troops, and that this should be included in any call for peace. That's seen as a sideways swipe against China, whose peace plan has called for a ceasefire without Russia first giving up any of the territory it has seized. Adding to the pressures on Russia, a new raft of sanctions has been announced, as well as steps to stop Moscow getting around them.
We are now focused on shutting the door on loopholes and continuing to cut Russia off from critical supplies. We will restrict trade in Russian diamonds. Russian diamonds are not forever.
This summit being hosted by the only country to have been the victim of an atomic attack, with the agenda dominated by Ukraine, facing its own present-day wartime nuclear threat. Rob McBride, Al Jazeera, Hiroshima, Japan.
The Ukrainian president is expected to travel to Japan.
At the Tech Expo in Silicon Valley, companies are focusing on artificial intelligence and machine learning. And they're also preparing for the next big thing. Quantum AI computing.
Quantum computing is a game changer.
These oddly beautiful chandelier-like contraptions are prototype quantum computers. Instead of silicon chips, they use atomic particles to store and transmit information.
This is not just a better, faster computer, right?
This is completely different. It's a new computing paradigm that will be unleashed on the world.
It could be unleashed in as little as 3 years.
The physics are complicated, but the bottom line is easy to grasp. A problem that would take a supercomputer 10,000 years to solve can be cracked by a quantum computer in 4 minutes.
The technology may have enormous benefits.
For instance, quantum sensing can make medical imaging much faster.
But such powerful tools can be used for good and bad. For example, quantum computers could make child's play of encryption.
At the point where quantum computing overtakes conventional computing is called Q-Day, or the quantum apocalypse. And that is the moment that all encryption systems that we have implemented today are useless. They're broken.
Superpowers are already engaged in a kind of quantum's arms race. President Joe Biden has imposed export bans on quantum technology to China. And there's another ominous potential.
I would not rule out the possibility of an intelligence explosion where we combine quantum with AI into generative and applied models that are so beyond our own intelligence that there are possibilities in which the technology could manipulate and control us or rule us. Sometimes it scares me.
Governments and corporations don't have much time to establish global guardrails for what may be the most powerful technology of all time. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Santa Clara, California.
Still ahead on Al Jazeera, the world's largest...
Located in the Cape Horn archipelago, the subantarctic region of Chile is the southernmost part of the Americas, before Antarctica itself. It's one of the very few untouched areas on Earth, with 2% land, 98% pristine water, and pre-industrial revolution air to breathe.
this is kind of a Jurassic Park, but a real Jurassic Park that has survived the impact of modernity. So Chile offers to the world these kind of natural laboratories.
Scientists here are studying climate change and global warming. Peat moss captures more greenhouse gases than all other vegetation combined. So, on this enormous peat bog, climate change expert Frederic Talasso has installed sophisticated instruments that measure how wind, temperature, ultraviolet light, among other factors, impact it.
The elecovariance tower gives us the total flux of CO2 or methane that is emitted or captured by the ecosystems. That would allow us to predict what could happen with the peatlands in the future.
These dead trees are the work of beavers who have no natural predators in this part of the world. They swam here from neighboring southern Argentina, where they were first brought for the fur industry, and where they've already caused massive destruction. Satellite imagery reveals that there are at least 36,000 beaver dams like the one you see here on this Cape Horn island alone. That deprives trees and plants of oxygen, which in turn rots the sediment below and turns into methane. Emissions of that greenhouse gas in this area have increased by 5 to 10-fold. What can be done? In the province's capital, Puerto Williams, we were invited to the inaugural global conference of the Cape Horn International Center, or CHIC. It's an ambitious initiative by the Chilean government and the University of Magallanes to identify, predict, and mitigate environmental changes. Geophysicist Matias Troncoso has just come back from installing a meteorological station on remote Horn Island that provides critical scientific data via satellite in real time.
Antarctica on its own is regulating the global warming and climate changes that we're witnessing, so whatever happens there will impact the entire world without exception.
If some researchers are right, that this subantarctic region is a precursor of what the South Pole may soon become, scientists will need all the information they can get. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Navarino Island, Chile.
They see you in the distance, they sense your breath, and they feel the heat of your skin. But despite their tiny brains, mosquitoes probably smell you first, from far away. This is a special facility for simulated blood-sucking, a 1,000 cubic meter box in the Zambian forest, enclosed by nets, with 6 pods for real humans to sleep in.
We like to think of it as the world's largest perfumery for mosquitoes.
Each tent is connected to a heated landing pad, fitted with infrared cameras that watch as hungry mosquitoes look for a nightly feed. The researchers who built it are trying to understand how the bugs pick their victims.
And this is quite similar to what a mosquito would experience in nature. When the African malaria mosquito actually enters a home, it actually has to follow warmth currents emitted from the human body of sleeping humans, and often humans are housed in groups. It's quite a busy smelling task for the mosquitoes.
Malaria, a parasite that is carried by mosquitoes, kills more than 500,000 people every year, and nearly half of the world is exposed to it.
It's quite surprising that mosquitoes also have a quite complex nervous system. Their brain actually looks orthologous or similar to our brain, believe it or not. A very, very tiny insect with a powerful sense of smell.
Under the camera, one of the landing pads. It's warm and it emits carbon dioxide just like us, but there are no human scents, so no mosquitoes. Another, same conditions, but with some characteristic human smells. A third, and now the smells are different. The researchers are assembling a menu to isolate the most irresistible whiffs.
We are actually developing synthetic compounds. For example, you can actually poison them, for example, so that they are lured to a specific trap and then poison them so that you reduce the biting of these vectors on humans.
Although the battle against malaria is waged across many fronts, this could help us understand why and how malaria-carrying mosquitoes find us in the night.
The more you understand the enemy, the better equipped you are in fighting the enemy. So it feels very, very, I don't know what word to use, but it's very exciting.
Colin Baker, Al Jazeera.
Still ahead on the Al Jazeera NewsHour,